So once again, welcome to Chart's free webinar series. Today, we are pleased to have Rob Lauber from XLO GLobal and Mike Parks from Inkling presenting the digital revolution in restaurant training and operations. Welcome, Rob and Mike, and thanks for being with us today.
Hey, thanks very much, Damien, and I really appreciate Chart giving us the opportunity to present in your webinar series. Thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Mike Parks, and as Damien mentioned, I am the CEO at Inkling. We're a San Francisco-based SaaS company focused on delivering an innovative digital learning experience for our customers. We enable learning in the flow of work for mission-critical, time-sensitive knowledge for frontline distributed workers. I personally spent the last 2 decades of my career working in enterprise retail across operations, people development, and property before joining a technology company in 2012. I've spent roughly the last 10 years working with customers on software and hardware product teams to improve the performance of people, optimize processes, and develop the best tools. I'm incredibly excited and privileged to be joined today by Rob Lauber, and I'll let Rob introduce himself here.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Hi, everybody. Great to be here and to talk to the Chart community. I'm Rob Lauber, obviously, formerly the Chief Learning Officer at McDonald's for 6 years from 2014 till I retired at the end of 2020. Previous to that was at Yum Brands for nearly 10 years as well. So it's a good amount of experience in the restaurant specifically, but hospitality industry as well. Really excited to talk to everybody today about what's happening. And I think part of it will be preaching to the choir, and part of it, hopefully you'll gain 1 or 2 new insights that'll help you think a little bit differently when we're done. So I'll throw it back to you, Mike.
Hey, thanks so much, Rob. We have tried to build a thoughtful agenda, and we're really looking forward to answering any questions that you, the audience, may have at the conclusion of today's session. Today, we're going to cover digital trends, how industries must adapt to what's happening in technology in our workplace, the current state of digital technology, specifically in restaurants, how we can embrace the digital transformation of the people experience, how to increase operational training and velocity with digital tools, and finally, the impact on restaurant performance. One of the biggest contributors to changes in technology over the last decade is the way people and organizations communicate. I see this in my personal life as my kids poke fun at me for texting incomplete sentences, using email, and taking handwritten notes, but the impact to enterprise customers has been even more profound. First, it has enabled efficiency and increased productivity. The modern workplace has experienced a complete shift in how we spend our time, as this time has been optimized and the efforts put into everyday tasks have been lightened. Employee productivity and efforts have been improved, allowing them to place more emphasis on important things such as precision and customer service. The level of expectations that we see of clients and coworkers has also changed as a result of technology in the workplace, which keeps everyone connected on a consistent and constant basis. All of this has led to an opportunity for increased collaboration. It's given us a level of communication we've never seen before, with the potential to connect to anyone, our employees, our leaders, our coworkers, at any time, from anywhere. And with this dramatic increase in collaboration comes a heightened sense of flexibility in how we communicate, allowing coworkers to share no matter where each individual may be. Teamwork can be elevated to a whole new level across the enterprise. These 2 things contribute to an opportunity to improve cost management, which is the bottom line of any business to achieve profitability. And with technology in the workplace, encouraging improved financial results, businesses can drive fiscal health as a result of innovative technology. And finally, we've certainly seen a heightened level of security. The security of a company, the information that company holds dear, can be compromised without the implementation of proper channels of technology and software. Just as savvy hackers are using technology to try to gain access to a business's sensitive information, we as companies need to implement innovative technology as a safe haven against that attack. Technology is moving so quickly that if you follow disruption, and Tony Seba is a fantastic professor at the University of Stanford on disruption, he tells us that sometimes we fail to recognize the speed and impact of technology and transformation to our companies until it's too late. So I want to take a look at one of the most famous examples of technology adoption and the speed of innovation we see across the world. I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but back in 2011, this is IBM Watson. And Watson won Jeopardy's Tournament of Champions with the largest prize in over 5 years on the show. And it had 3 capabilities that differentiated it from traditional program systems. It could understand, it could reason, and probably most impressively, it could learn. It was the advent of artificial intelligence at scale. And when you think about the impact that it has and the rules for disruption and innovation, think in the rule of 10 times. Is it 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper, 10 times smaller? And what's crazy to think about is that from 2011 today, Watson continues to be disruptive. It has evolved at a pace that is hard for us to fathom. Back in 2011, when it was on the show, the size of the computer that did the computation and thought for Watson was the size of a typical living room in the United States. And by 2012, it would fit into a bedroom. By 2013, it would fit into a closet. And by 2014, 3 pizza boxes. By 2017, a deck of cards. By 2020, a phone. And all signs are pointing to the fact that by 2025, it can fit in a human being's ear, which makes us wonder what we'll actually have to think about in a very short period of time. We've put a supercomputer in the hands of every worker in our workforce that has access to all of the information known to mankind, both fact and fiction. And it's the mobile device that provide companies the opportunity to partner with people like Inkling. So organizations like McDonald's can meet the needs of their employees at their time of need and in a medium that they prefer. As we think about that digital transformation and how quickly the world is moving, I would love to turn it over to Rob now to share his thoughts on the current state of digital automation in the restaurant industry.
Thanks, Mike. Certainly a lot to talk about in this space in terms of digital automation in the restaurant industry. So really appreciate you turning it over to me. I think that there's a lot we can talk about that was going on, before the pandemic in terms of what's happening. And while it's easy to point the finger at COVID for turning everybody's attention to the limitations of current approaches to learning and the importance of having a robust and effective digital learning approach, the truth is that there were signs of trouble long before COVID arrived. Both instructor-led and e-learning have been going under the magnifying glass for quite a while now, as organizations seek more modern approaches. And certainly, us at McDonald's, we were not, immune from that as well. And we found similar types of things in terms of problems or challenges with the traditional learning approach. And we found that we had, the average enterprise, for example, right now has 20 plus different learning tools and platforms, which could create a real challenge with the experience of the employee. 91% of buyers believe that the working style of employees is different today and that new approaches and technologies are needed. So that's all of you out there as buyers are thinking about that and saying, gosh, we need to be doing things differently and thinking differently about how we're helping people engage and helping people learn in our businesses. And only 34% of us believe traditional learning technologies can actually adapt to today's workplace. So some real challenges out there in terms of where we're going. But there's also some great opportunities with new learning technology. So 91% of learning technology buyers or us are excited about innovations. And I've been seeing tons of innovation in the last couple of years that's starting to happen. As well as 93% of us believe new learning software solutions can complement and amplify the existing learning technologies we have in place. And 83% of workers, most importantly, believe that it's their own responsibility to reskill themselves. So it's good to see that employees are really taking charge of their careers and taking charge of and recognizing the fact that they need to keep up and continuously learn. Now, I thought this next slide seems funny, in terms of the wrecking ball there, but I think the impact of COVID to accelerating digital transformation really can't be understated. Every company really is now a technology company, particularly in hospitality and restaurant. There's really no avoiding it. And this means managing the transition to a digitally driven business model isn't just critical to beating competitors and keeping up with competitors, it really becomes crucial to survival. And 2 critical reasons that it's so important are, one, the acceleration of change The pace of digital change is really rising exponentially, making it really difficult to maintain a position of leadership and requiring acceleration of adoption of new digital solutions on a constant basis. And then the second is workforce transformation. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but employees really expect a good modern experience across all their touch points. And companies must ensure their interactions are seamless and exceptional. And you can see this quote from McKinsey here that's, says a new survey finds that responses to COVID-19 have speeded the adoption of digital technologies by several years, and that many of these changes could be here for the long haul. And I think we're all experiencing that every day now in terms of where we go. But we're also seeing a lot of new demands in the environment as well, and the new necessity for organizations around elevating the employee experience. We've got things, our environments are certainly more demanding in the hospitality and restaurant industries as well, around things like food safety. Standard operating procedures have been changing. Cleanliness and cleaning procedures certainly have been elevated in almost every aspect of every business in hospitality. Order accuracy has always been a challenge and continues to be a challenge in the business, particularly as we engage consumers more digitally and as we give them more power to, over control over what they order. And then customer sat is always a challenge as well, and keeping that up, and brand consistency in multi-unit locations. How do we keep that experience the same? And not only that, focusing now on thinking about the employee experience. We also see a big talent shortage in terms of, experienced workers, fewer of them, much higher turnover. People have more choices on where to go. And that's putting a lot of stress as well on the management teams, as well as training programs that need to be put in place to retain critical talent. And then the third sort of necessity or opportunity that's really putting pressure on the business is really that continued focus on insights into performance. So how are we preparing employees in terms of being onboarding, in terms of handling limited time offers, in terms of executing operating procedures, dealing with things like repair and maintenance on equipment, as well as more adaptive learning, really getting people recommended courses closer to the time that they actually need it. And on top of that, really providing a clear path for people and a compelling reason for people to stay at the organization in terms of showing them a career path that has skill development and or potentially a promotion path somewhere in that organization. So lots of challenges there. And I'll throw it back to Mike now to take it from here.
Hey, thanks so much, Rob. I really appreciate it. For those attendees, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please go ahead and enter those into the chat. We will do our best to answer those at the end of today's session. I'm going to date myself and perhaps regionalize myself a little bit with this analogy. I use analogies a lot. Some are hits, some are misses. But here's another chance and a swag at one of those. So some of you may recognize this image. This is for my American friends, where's Waldo? If you're a European friend, perhaps this is Wally to you. But think about this picture, and Waldo represents information that is critical and necessary to a worker in your environment, and she or he needs that information as quickly as possible to execute against a standard operating procedure, to deal with an emergency that's happened at a location, or perhaps just to have the right tool to do her or his job at the time of need in your environment. And trying to find all of that across the information that is a location, the subject matter experts at your locations, the binders that you probably have paper-based materials in, or your learning management platform can be difficult for that person. But with time and effort, they can probably find Waldo or the value or the information that they need to do their job. And the question is, what's the level of effort? What is the amount of time it takes them? And what is the experience? If it's in a paper binder or computer-based training module, are we meeting them where we need to? But you probably don't have one location or one department or one use case or one standard operating procedure or limited time offering. And so the solution for content becomes this massive sea of information across your enterprise. And you don't have one learner or one team that you need to teach. And so the problem to get the right content to the right people at the right time gets so much larger and so much more complex that it makes it incredibly difficult for that learner in her or his time of need to get to value, to find water. He's always there hiding in the sea of all the other things that you might do. But the question we have for ourselves is, how do we put ourselves in a position where it is not a pull activity for the employee? It becomes a push activity at a time of need, and a simple way for them to get to value. So the level of effort goes down to offer our employees a differentiated learning experience and ensure for you, our enterprise customer, a consistent experience for your end customer.
Thanks, Mike. Hey, the new workforce enablement learning model is really all about relieving employee stress by giving them easy, anytime, anywhere, any device, really, access to training and knowledge. It's all about the hybrid learning environment where people are remote and decentralized, and it's all about constantly and quickly reskilling and upskilling your employees to drive better business agility. And while sometimes the traditional learning model, I'm showing on the left here, of teach, study, and test is really effective in teaching new skills to employees and partners, they also need to be able to do a quick refresher on what they learned on the job exactly when they need it. And often there's less and less time to use the teach, study, test model when you're trying to keep up with the speed of your business, staffing shortages, and all those other challenges I talked about a few minutes ago. That's why the new digital employee experience needs to be based on find, learn, and go. Instead of sitting in a class and listening to an instructor, studying the material, and then taking a test on what they learn, employees need to be able to quickly find what they need to learn it, and do it right there on the job immediately. This model works well for operational learning and also reinforcing traditional learning. Often employees and partners learn what they need to do in the traditional model, pass the test, and then a few weeks or months later, they need to recall or refresh their learning on a specific skill or topic, and they usually can't do that. With a new digital system like Inkling, employees can take a structured learning course in learning pathways and then quickly search for a specific skill they need a refresher on. Or they can access that refresher training in the context of an operational checklist as they're doing the job. This type of find, learn, do learning model drives learning and business agility and results in lower costs, fewer mistakes, and higher customer satisfaction and sales. And we had tremendous success with this at McDonald's. Mike?
Thanks, Rob. From everything we've heard so far, it really sounds like there's a critical gap in most organizations and their digital transformation strategy, specifically around people, that is overlooked, and that people experience. Rob, can you maybe frame for us what that looks like in your environment today?
Yeah, let's talk about the digital experience gap a little bit here. Make sure we're on the right slide here. Yep, here we go. We've seen the transformation in the back of house systems like HR and payroll, in automated scheduling based on throughput, supply chain, even learning management systems. But to move from the back of the house to the people experience, we need to include knowledge of standard operating procedures, workforce enablement to both prepare and repair our workforce, and learning in our digital transformation initiatives. This can really enable organizations to improve the customer experience and reduce buying friction and enable a consistent brand experience across an enterprise like never before. Changes to the workforce don't just include generational differences. That need for workers has shifted. According to a white paper on vanishing trades, there is one job that requires a graduate degree for every 2 jobs that require an undergraduate degree, and for every 7 jobs that require a technical certificate or no degree at all. And the war for talent really has never been fiercer. Coupled with that, the fact that millennials now make up the largest portion of the workforce, and their expectations are markedly different from the workforce even a decade ago. How do we effectively address these changes? What's your organization doing today? Is there a strategic plan in place? Mike?
Thanks, Rob. I'm going to date myself here just a little bit as well, because when you think about what Rob just shared, and the employees you have today and the highest level of experience expectations they have, we live in a world where my own children have access to incredibly immersive, lifelike experience. If you think about video games like virtual reality, where they can literally interact with the game. And so they have this perfect perception and incredibly high standards of things that are delivered digitally. Yet in many cases, if you think about the onboarding, the training programs that we use in enterprise businesses to give to our employees, they can struggle to live up to those expectations that those employees have, and they've learned to have at home or at school, because we're not giving that digital immersive experience. And back in my day, when I was 8 years old and my dad brought home an Atari, like Pong was life-changing. It's bits and bytes and, you know, two lines going back and forth, moving a ball. But if I asked my own children to play this game today, they would laugh at me and tell me that it was hideously out of pace. And that's the environment that we have with our workforce today. We're giving them tools and processes that do not align with their expectations. We spent some time here, Rob, talking about the discussion of the current state, the challenges, how organizations can best address this with digital tools. Can we talk about how to increase velocity, and maybe specifically what you all did at McDonald's to meet the employees where they are?
Yeah, happy to. I think, you know, one of the things we looked at really early at McDonald's in my tenure there was looking at how employees really wanted to learn. And what we found was that 70% of them want hands-on training from their managers. 40% want to shadow, you know, other more experienced employees. Senior is probably a relative term in the hospitality industry, but someone with more experience than them for sure. You know, we found 22% of the time they really want some external kind of course training to get things through. And 9% actually wanted training videos or reading materials, which is a big counterculture to what we hear today in the marketplace, where, you know, people are taking a very video first kind of approach. And so, you know, so we really looked at, you know, it across three particular specific areas. And these were the ones here, Mike, around corporate HR learning, operational training, and really operational knowledge, and how we can organize the information and the learning that we can make available to people against these categories.
No, I appreciate that very much. I mean, when you think about corporate HR learning, how did the maybe environment and the regular workload of that team change as you guys went from a paper-based system to a digital system?
Yeah, you know, there were things that stayed the same and there were things that changed. So if you think about the corporate HR learning pillar here, some of these things mainly stayed the same in the context of they were repeatable, or they were like compliance related training, those types of pieces that were very sort of core to every person that worked in the system that needed to be done. And so a lot of these pieces we could move to digital formats like virtual, right, where people were receiving things without having to go somewhere, and e-learning, which we had traditionally in place as well. But, you know, and we also then looked at sort of the shelf life of things in terms of how long did we believe that content was actually going to be relevant in the organization as well. And so we took that kind of approach in terms of looking at overall the content that we had, particularly on the corporate HR learning side. When we got to operational training, though, we started looking much more dramatically different about it. And it was really around, you know, to your point earlier, or I think the point I might have made earlier about, you know, several months later, people will forget how to do what it is that you train them to do in the class. So we really looked at focusing on building things that were, you know, that would build mastery quickly and deliver operational training really, you know, as close to the flow of work as we possibly could get. So we had a mantra around being flexible, easy, and realistic for people to access and to execute. And we used, you know, like job skills and training happened then at station with someone else, remembering that 70% of the people said they wanted to learn from someone else. We took advantage of that because people were telling us they actually were learning that way, not through the traditional e-learning programs that we had. So we did that as well. And then we started moving later on towards more types of mobile pieces as well. And early in the game, we're experimenting with things like augmented reality and how that might be able to help us operationally move faster again in the flow of work. And the last piece on operational knowledge, really around these SOPs and these kind of pieces, really looking further at the day-to-day business execution of tasks that need to be completed. So how do I open the store? How do I do a food safety checklist at the beginning of every shift? Those types of pieces, and really began to look at how do we move those pieces to a much more digital format? How do we make those really easy to reference and to pull up? And to make sure that really anyone in that back of house could, or in the restaurant basically could pick up a digital device, search, find, and execute against any of these particular pieces that we were going after.
Oh, that's fantastic, Rob. I really appreciate you sharing that. If you think about the workflow that I think most organizations go through, it's rather linear, right? To optimize that mission critical learning. So you need to be able to create, share, and manage a library of content. Hopefully use that content as repeatable artifacts, blocks, if you will, in a training program for formal structured learning. Then move to operational checklists that are embedded with training, give the employee and maybe the supervisory team quick access and knowledge to micro-learning and mobile. And then ultimately, as you move from paper-based or computer-based training modules to a centralized system, it gives your organization the opportunity to probably measure, track, and analyze not just the dissemination of information, but the ability for people to really engage with that information and to learn, right? It's impossible to engage learners and provide mission critical impact in the flow of work that's different perhaps than the environment before. Is that fair?
Oh yeah, for sure. Sure.
And so if you think about the experience, right, the impact you had at McDonald's, what you set out to achieve, and ultimately, were you hanging a banner over an aircraft carrier that said mission accomplished? Let's talk a little bit about the digital transformation, the brand experience, the restaurant performance that you and the team at the McDonald's went through.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. You can see some of the headlines here, but prior to Inkling, we were spending about 10 hours per new hire using actually e-learning courses in the back of the house and averaging 150% or so turnover on a pretty regular basis. So the biggest insights we could get was really around sort of the, I call it like a forced march, where we were making people execute the training, and we were logging that in our LMS, and we would know that people did it as sort of a certification process, basically, that we would put in place. But what we did, we went out and actually talked to people, and when I got settled in role, and one of the challenges was to sort of modernize the training experience. Talking to people about how they really learned, and people were saying, these 10 hours are really great, but they don't really teach me how to do the job. I still have to go and depend on someone else to do it, or some of the things that I learn in it, I don't actually apply till months later, and then I forget, or weeks later, or days later, and then I forget how to do it anyway. So so what we did was we set out and said, we need to sort of digitize that whole process. And we also had, an operations manual that was about 4,000 pages long, sitting in binders in the back. And so we worked to really move that through in two dimensions. The first one was to take all that binder paper and move it into the platform and digitize it, so it became instantly indexed and searchable and organized in a way that people could readily retrieve it when they needed to. For the business, that also unlocked for us our ability to update it 365, 24/7, which was really a new idea, because prior to that, we only had the capacity to actually update it 5 times a year. With the business, talking about velocity, with our business moving, faster and faster, 5 times a year really was not a satisfactory way to try and keep up with the pace that the business was changing at. And I can't imagine what we would have done if we had COVID, and at that time when we were working in paper, it would have been a pretty big mess. So that was one component of the first thing we did. The second thing we did was we then designed our training materials. We walked away from our 10 hours of e-learning, and designed our training materials more to mirror the way people are actually learning the job. So we built support materials really to help the person that's showing, like if I'm showing you, Mike, how to make fries, we built the support materials for me to be able to show you the most consistent way to do that, and included things like video elements and other pieces that would enhance what I would normally be able to show you. And it could happen actually right at the station where you were going to actually learn how to do the job. And then my accountability became to sign off that you were capable basically of working that station independently, which then enabled our scheduling system and everything else to get you productive in the job as fast as possible. But anyway, the ultimate result of that was that we've got more than 16,000 restaurants. Almost every restaurant in the U.S. is currently using this platform. And we've been able to, decrease onboarding hours by about 2/3, which is a pretty decent annual savings, around $30 million of, savings, plus or minus. I think that number's probably higher at today's wage. But at the time, we used a $10 an hour wage based on that. And really what it told us was not necessarily that we directly saved labor costs, but more along the lines of that labor could then be reallocated to actually serving customers, right? Because we were able to get people productive faster, and we were able to simplify the way that they could learn, and we were able to make it more flexible for them to learn what they needed to learn when they needed to learn it. They could actually spend more time serving customers than they had in the past. And that was a huge win for us operationally in the organization as well. Back to the manuals piece, the business case just on printing and shipping those manuals to 14,000 locations, for example, more than covered our implementation costs to make things happen. And our team really, really adapted then to the model as well, and explored out even further how we could drive LTOs and other pieces through the platform as well. But really now it's called Fred inside McDonald's, but it's actually the go-to source, in the restaurant for training, access to training, and reference and performance support and how people do business. So really exciting. We're in multiple, but I believe it's probably even higher than that now. I think it's probably 20 or 30 actually markets and growing. The goal is world dominance basically, because the business case and use case country to country is exactly the same.
Oh, that's fantastic, Rob. I really appreciate you sharing that story with us.
Sure.
Just a quick reminder to the attendees, if you do have any questions, please put those in the Q&A. We'll get to those in just a couple minutes here. So we've got a unique opportunity to talk about an unprecedented situation in the restaurant industry with restaurant leaders, partners, operators, and professions. The restaurant industry is more than ever highly competitive. It's an industry that continues to face a significant labor crisis. I talked to a customer a couple of weeks ago who told us that they had engineered their stores to be able to deliver a consistent, differentiated experience for their customer. And so during peak demand, lunch and dinner, they had a staffing need for their restaurants that was far and above what we would typically see in QSR to be able to deliver that experience. And they might need 20 employees at a lunch shift or a dinner shift, and only 16 show up on a given day at restaurant A or C. How can a digital training tool optimize process and help those people give the same experience as if everyone had shown up to work, is something that we're hearing pretty consistently. The turnover in these organizations, I think we've heard statistics as high as 7 out of 10 newly onboarded employees opt out of the business in the first 90 days. And so this intense competition for talent and the margin pressures that you have in the business, it puts us in a position where we constantly need to innovate, to try to create that differentiated experience for the employee. And I feel like that's the baseline, but perhaps we're even in a uniquer time in the restaurant industry. In many ways, we've never seen the challenges and changes in the industry that we've had to go through in the last 24 months with this global pandemic. And so I'm proud to say at Inkling that we have a number of high-profile restaurant clients, including McDonald's. We speak to many others constantly to try to drive this change for our customers. And across that portfolio of customers, we've we've put ourselves in a position where, this is not a Staples easy button. Going through this digital transformation, you don't purchase a digital learning solution and put your feet up on the desk and say mission accomplished. This is hard work to drive an organization through this change. But we've been blessed to partner with customers to drive a $2 million savings on reduced shipping and eliminated cost of printing of historically paper-based documentation. We've seen more than a 50% reduction in turnover, initial turnover with the client. And we've heard statistics, as I mentioned, as high as 70% in the first 90 days with those employees. We've been able to empower organizations to provide a differentiated experience to their end customer with a measurable 5% increase in CSAT scores. And then when you think about agility, we're trying to enable teams. Rob, you mentioned, we used to have this legacy content that we could update 5 times a year. Now you live in a world where that content can be living, breathing, always up to date, irrespective of the changes that need to be made. And to do that, you have to allow those teams to be agile. And we've seen a 30 to 60% reduction for those internal teams to create and distribute net new content. And you mentioned with McDonald's, that cost savings for you as an organization of roughly $30 million annually in onboarding. I'm a firm believer that there is no best, there's only better. And so continuous process improvement is something we should all strive for. And with that in mind, one last analogy for you. This is a simple play on Pavlov's hierarchy of needs. And when you think about moving up this pyramid from information to content to knowledge to performance, and the benefits to an organization, I'll start on the left-hand side. Oftentimes when we think about training an organization, we think about information that comes from a corporate office or a regulatory body or some sort of standard operating procedure that we need to get out. But I would argue that there's also information that exists out amongst the workforce. There are people with a particular set of skills or knowledge about a particular location or piece of equipment that organizations need to be able to memorialize. And so that information across an organization needs to be turned into content that can be disseminated to another location or the next employee that takes that role. And really effective organizations move that content into knowledge for people. And we see that the benefit to the organization starts to increase. And finally, hopefully, knowledge becomes performance, where we're able to gauge, are people performing at the expected standard, and can we improve that standard over time? And I'm a firm believer that humans turn information into knowledge, but perhaps more importantly, best-in-class companies turn that knowledge into performance. If you can take the data from a digital learning platform and you can integrate it with your sales data or your performance data or your operational data, that data can really tell a story. And it's not easy. The level of effort is high. But typically when we think about training, I think about it in 2 stages. And Rob, you mentioned the first of those, which is prepare. How do I prepare an employee to do a job that he or she has never done before? And then once I've prepared them, over time, perhaps they start to fall down or the standard has changed and I have an opportunity to repair, to put them in a position where I can make them productive again. Any thoughts on that pyramid, Rob?
Yeah, no, I think this is spot on in terms of, our experience and frankly, my 30 years experience in learning and development. I think you can also think about this as a confidence curve, right? So if somebody's got a little bit of amount of information, they may not, have converted that into knowledge at that point. But as people get, further into like, I really know something and I really understand something, that's when performance really gets unlocked, because people then have that confidence to be able to execute. And that shows up in a lot of places, to the turnover pieces, to the time to productivity, and reducing onboarding time kind of pieces as well. And I think that, on the level of effort side, it's a continuous process. The McDonald's journey that I described is still going on. But it took a good probably 3 years or so for us to really get our feet and get, smart about how we were doing it and really test and learn our way to where we were we had a very robust system that was working for us and with us in what we were doing. So, lots of learning along the way in terms of what we can do, and then unlocking on top of that, what else can we go after as well, right? So thinking about, to your point about shortened cycle times, limited time offers, our traditional path was to launch and use a cascade kind of approach where we, create a 30-page document, bring a bunch of people in and then have them go out in the field and train a bunch of people and so on until we got down to the restaurants. Now we're able to do we're able to launch that in Inkling. They're able to access that content right away. And we follow it up with a virtual session where we can basically answer questions from, all 14,000 restaurants about the product or the limited time offer that we're launching. And it enables the organization to start realizing revenue faster and be much more agile in terms of our ability to respond to the marketplace or competitors or the speed at which we want to move as a business. So really interesting.
Oh, that's awesome, Rob. I really appreciate it. So we have some questions coming in. As you can imagine, most of these questions are geared towards you as a subject matter expert who's been there, done that, as opposed to the technologist. So let's start with the first of those. Did you replace all job aids with Inkling as well? And how many devices would you typically have per location to support like training and onboarding of your team?
Yeah, we did replace almost all of our job aids as well. I would say the exception is that we did keep some what we call build cards over some of our stations, particularly around making particular product. I would say where that visual cue, perpetual visual cue, was there. Not impossible to replace, but probably harder business case to make around those pieces. So you can say probably 80% of the paper that we had, or probably more, really more like 90% of the paper that we were using disappeared. As far as devices go, I would say, what we started with was working within what we had, which was largely a desktop environment. And this is 2015 or so. So I'm going back a few years. But it's evolved now to where there's probably 2 or 3 devices at least in every restaurant as we go. And one of our critical pieces, because we're highly franchised, was to be able to empower franchisees to invest in the level of device or the sophistication of the device that they wanted. So some literally started on Kindle Fires and some started on iPad Pros, and that was okay. It worked well in either environment, and it suited the need in either environment, and that was really critical for us. To bringing our franchisees along, because we gave them some level of control in terms of how they wanted to invest in making these devices available. But I'd say 2 to 3 is typically what you'll find today in a restaurant.
Okay. Another question came through, Rob. You mentioned virtual sessions for hourly employees to help them in training.
Yeah.
Were those paid sessions or were they voluntary for those employees?
For limited time offers, the virtual sessions are largely voluntary. So typically you're going to get like a restaurant manager and probably some shift managers that would attend that as well. And then they'll cascade down to the team. But our speed in reaching those managers is now, days instead of weeks, or, I think we would start 6 weeks in advance of a limited time offer before. And now we could do that as quickly as 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time.
Sure. This is probably one we can handle together. Maybe I'll let you go first with your own experience. Implementing our tool, but organizations like McDonald's, you don't start with a library of nothing. You've got a wide swath of existing material. Can that be reused via Inkling, or did you have to do some reauthoring there?
Actually, what we did was we created a few templates, widgets, I guess they're called, and we used those as a means to basically import our operating manuals right up front. And the goal was really to get the content into the system first so that it was searchable and indexed and people could pull it up. And then systematically over time, refine and revise as we were doing updates or as a procedure would change, then we would wholesale change the section to a new format that would get modernized. So it evolved, I would say, over time, but job one was really moving everything into digital, and that was pretty straightforward. We didn't really have to reauthor it. I literally think it took 3 weeks for us to move 4,000 pages of content into the system, be up and running, and have a proof of concept where it was indexed and searchable for people.
No, that's really well stated, Rob. And then when you think about Inkling as an organization, we take a multi-pronged approach to existing content. So if it's a simple standard operating procedure or something that we want to put into the application, and like you mentioned, digitize, make it searchable for the widest breadth of employees in its existing form, we can ingest that in its current state or to a standardized template really cost effectively for our clients. If, however, there's a desire to optimize process and make that artifact more interactive with perhaps some videos or some GIFs or some actual interactive components, then potentially reauthoring would be necessary. It just depends on the end goal for the customer.
Right, and that's actually what we did. As things were being changed and updated, then we would look at how we could enhance the interactivity of it. Think about the design. So if we were changing a cleaning procedure or something, we may include a video snippet that demonstrated it. And that stuff, obviously, you don't get in a paper-based format. So
yeah, no, that's really helpful. I mean, when you think about scale, another customer, H&R Block, I think we did over 25,000 individual documents in terms of ingesting their legacy library into the Inkling application to make it digital for that customer.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing I would say is like just get started, and you can refine. The great thing is you can refine over time, right? And we had a team of people that were consistently keeping content up to date and curating, basically. And frankly, we were learning at the same time, so we were evolving as well, and thinking, about learning the full breadth of capabilities that we could actually execute on.
Sure. So this is a no pressure commercial question for you, Rob. When you think about pre and post Inkling, what was the time it took to get a new member fully trained and productive compared to after you went to a digital solution?
Yeah, I think there's two dimensions to this. One is that it moved to a fully digital solution, so it became faster to access and faster to keep up to date, and easier to do out on the floor. So there's that piece that filled in. And then second, our design approach enabled people to learn a station and become productive, which we didn't have before. So that 10.5 hours of e-learning, just simple math, is we got rid of that 10.5 hours of e-learning, so that it's 10.5 hours shorter. But we probably added in about possibly an hour to 90 minutes of upfront to learn a particular station, and drove a more continuous learning model up front. So I'd say, we went from 10.5 hours to 90 minutes before someone can actually start doing something in a restaurant.
Oh, that's fantastic improvement. And in your experience with Inkling, did you use it to replace other communication tools like newsletters or company intranet for weekly postings and document repository?
We did not, although at the time we started using Inkling, that the communications capability didn't exist. It does now. And we had other means of doing those kind of things. But I think if we had started out with those capabilities, we probably would have explored it much more heavily.
Yeah, I would say that that all of those newsletters, intranet for weekly postings, document repository, those are all right in our wheelhouse of things that we think we can do well. So for customers that are interested in potentially digitizing not just learning management, but those pieces of their organization as well, we can help.
Yeah, I can give you a simple example of like document repository replacement would be all our instructor-led training manuals, participant guides, move to Inkling. So when people would come into even an instructor-led class, we would have them pull up their ink doc, and because it was assigned to them, they could go in then and take notes in it, and it would guide them through the notes of the class as well. So that's another sort of more creative approach to doing it, but an example of, again, the elimination of printing and shipping and everything else.
And then another question here, you'll post the learning being done online or done through a digital platform. What steps did you guys put in place at McDonald's to ensure that it was done correctly or up to a standard? Did you have any certifications or tests or a review from manager or trainees that was done?
Yeah, we had a, because it was shoulder to shoulder, we had a requirement that the person that was showing someone how to do the job had to essentially work with that person to the point where they were capable of demonstrating that they could do it independently. And that person that was showing had to sign off essentially, like if I was teaching you, Mike, I'd have to say, I saw that Mike Parks could, work the fryer. without, independently. And that essentially would be noted in the system and would be passed along to the scheduling system that our managers would then interact with to know that Mike was ready to work a shift on the fryer and would need someone else's help doing it. So there was a level of accountability within store that really existed to do that. So I'd call that loosely a certification process, but definitely an accountability process, because I wouldn't want to sign off on you, say you were ready, and then have the manager turn around to me and say, Mike can't do this. What's going on? Right. That's less than a fun conversation. So there was a good level of accountability and teamwork built into the process that we used.
Yeah, and within the application, as the platform has grown over time, working with customers like yourself, we have built the ability to take quizzes, do certifications, and then give visibility to people like you that says, hey, 87 people have taken this test, 75% have passed, and even down to the individual. What score did they get? How many times did they have to take the test to pass? So you can truly see who's learning, who understands, who's ready. We can randomize those questions. There's a ton of capability there.
Yeah, I think the Ink forms is another example of something that is a fantastic capability that came out right as I was retiring, I guess, that I would have loved to have jumped into, because there were probably 100 use cases at McDonald's for that.
Yeah, we are finding that our customers, through their creativity, are testing the bounds of what Ink forms can do. And so we love that combination of certification, an Ink forms checklist, and as you mentioned, shoulder to shoulder validation from a manager, subject matter expert, that this employee is ready.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I think the last question we have in the queue is, and I always love questions like this, what is the typical mix between text-based and video-based content in percentage? As an enterprise software provider, I can tell you that if all customers were typical, it would make our jobs easier, because you guys would all have the same need.
Yeah, it's interesting for us from a, I don't think we thought about text and video. We thought about text, we thought about video, we also thought about visuals. So photos, drawings, other pieces as well. So if I don't know, if it would be a guess to the person that asked this question, but I would say that, it started at pretty much zero. And moved much more towards 60, 75, 80% of it was one of those media formats other than text. I think as we were progressing and as we were curating more content, understanding the capabilities better, building more assets that we knew we could use inside the system, those things, that percentage went up exponentially.
No, I think that's really helpful. When you think about Inkling as a company, I'm not sure that by customer we think about it in terms of what percentage, although some customers leverage video more than others. Even the text that we have is more engaging with digital timelines and graphics and tips than you would typically see in a traditional Word document or PDF. That said, we've got an aspirational roadmap to add things like 3D widgets to create an immersive experience, and potentially even some AR, VR capabilities into the application.
Yeah, I know we use the flashcards a lot, for example, and that feature a lot, and I found it to be super helpful for people. Like, I could quiz you, Mike, and use the flashcards in the Inkling app basically as a way to do it.
Well, Rob, I cannot thank you enough for joining me today and having this discussion about digital transformation in restaurants. I think we have exhausted the queue of questions, and I want to thank the Chart organization again for hosting us and for allowing us to present. And I look forward to seeing you soon, sir.
Yes, you too. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time today.